Hey everyone, we're back with your Chapter 7 practice test. We're looking at number 14 now, the slope field question. And the first thing we're supposed to do is graph the slope field for the differential equation. So we have a set of points coordinates over here, and I'm going to go ahead and just list those coordinates out right now. So here we are with the first row of coordinates, and we're talking about the row right here where all the y-coordinates are 1. Now it's nice to do it this way because then you don't have to worry about the y-coordinate anymore. You just have to worry about the x-coordinate. So for example, over here for negative 2, 1, our slope dy dx, that's going to be negative 2 plus 1 multiplied by 1. And all the way across the row, we're just going to be multiplying by this 1 because our y-coordinate is 1 for all of them. So if we're multiplying by 1, that means the slope is going to be the same thing as the x-coordinate plus 1. So the x-coordinate plus 1 here is minus 1. The x-coordinate plus 1 here is 0. X-coordinate plus 1 is 1, 2, and 3. Now most of the time you're going to see a pattern as we go across over here. And that pattern will be obvious. So once you start to see it forming, you can actually stop computing. So let's put this row of slopes onto the row where y equals 1. Now it's important that we have slopes that are similar to what we're seeing. That looks like a slope of negative 1. Definitely should be aiming at this point over here. That's definitely a slope of 0. But even more important is the trend of the slope is correct. In other words, the slope is getting more and more positive as we go from left to right. So let's get the next row of coordinates and we'll see what happens. In this next row of coordinates, the y-coordinates are all 0. And if we noticed over here, we're going to have to multiply every x-coordinate plus 1 times the y-coordinate. So we're always going to be multiplying by 0. So that makes all of these slopes equal to 0. It was getting kind of hard to see the slopes, so I kind of changed color to green here. But as you can see, this entire row, all the slopes are 0. So we can go to the next row and we'll see what happens. Now all the y-coordinates are negative 1. And as we go across this time, we're going to see we get negative 2 plus 1 multiplied by negative 1. And these are all going to be multiplied by negative 1. So this is actually going to be the same slopes as what we saw in the first line, but it's going to be opposite sign. So over here we had negative 1, so this will be positive 1. That's going to be 0. This was positive 1, so down over here we get negative 1, negative 2, and negative 3. So this row down over here, where y equals negative 1, that's basically the reverse of this line up here, where y equals 1. We got one more row to do. This row is going to be the toughest one to compute, actually. Not difficult, but more difficult than the one we've been doing. So we've got negative 2 plus 1, now multiplied by negative 2. So negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. Over here we've got negative 1 plus 1 multiplied by negative 2. Obviously that's 0. Over here we've got 0 plus 1 multiplied by negative 2. So that's a negative 2. And if you see the pattern here, 2, 0, negative 2. Probably the next one's going to be negative 4. So 1 plus 1 multiplied by negative 2, yeah, that's negative 4. And this one should be negative 6. Yes, it's going to be negative 6. So again, like I was saying, the pattern is going to be noticeable if you just go across the rows. So let's put those slopes into our slope field. And these slopes start to get a little bit difficult to do, especially the ones that are really steep. But let's just make sure that as we're doing this, the slopes are getting more and more negative, and it appears as though they are. So here's our slope field. Not a big deal. This is probably more coordinates than you would have to do on an AP test. So yeah, you can rest with that. Letter B says to describe all the points on the xy axis where the slope is negative. So this is a product. X plus 1 multiplied by y, that's a product. And a product is negative if, or a product of two numbers is negative if one of the two numbers is positive and one of the two numbers is negative. So there are two ways of doing this. The first way is if x plus 1 is negative and y is positive. The second number is positive. And the other way of doing this, or if x plus 1 happens to be positive and the second factor y is negative. Simplify just a little bit. So x is less than negative 1 and y is greater than 0. Or x is greater than negative 1 and y is less than 0. So we can summarize that. Notice that this isn't saying to list all the coordinates. It's asking you to actually describe all the points. So to describe all the points in an xy plane, you're going to have to use some inequalities. Okay, so here's our description. The slope is negative if x is less than negative 1 and y is greater than 0, or if x is greater than negative 1 and y is less than 0. Remember that the logic that comes from is if you have a product of two numbers and the result is going to be negative, one of the factors has to be negative and the other factor has to be positive. So that takes us through letter C. And we're supposed to use Euler's method with x equals negative 0.05 to approximate f of 1 if f of 2 is equal to 2. So there is a process for this, and we'll go ahead and write it down. The process for Euler's method is to start with x naught and y naught. Then we calculate delta x. Then we calculate the slope, which is, by the way, m, or dy dx. And then we calculate delta y, which is, by the way, m multiplied by delta x. And then we calculate x1, y1, which is x plus delta x and y plus delta y. So when I do this, I'm going to go across this, and we'll see how we get there. So we're starting off at, I believe, 2, 2. Yep, 2, 2. And we're using delta x equals negative 0.05. I didn't mention this, but you're going to have a calculator for this. So negative 0.05. Now the slope is equal to x plus 1 multiplied by y. And I got that from dy dx over here. Okay, that's still going to be our dy dx, even if we have moved on to letter C, because nothing else has told us that we have a new dy dx. So our dy dx is 2 plus 1 multiplied by 2, which is 2 times 3 is 6. Now our delta y is going to be 6 multiplied by negative 0.05. And lastly, we have x plus delta x and y plus delta y. And that gives me 2 plus negative 0.05. Delta x is right here. That's 1.95. And 2 plus 0.3, that's y plus negative 0.3, and that's 1.7. And now we ask, did we get there yet? And the answer is no. So we're going to go back down over here, and we're going to write down our last result, 1.95 and 1.7, and we're going to do the whole thing all over again. My delta x is still negative 0.05. My m this time is going to be a little bit more difficult. That's going to be 1.95 plus 1 multiplied by 1.7. 5.015. Next, we'll take that 5.015 and we'll multiply it by delta x, which is 0.05. That's negative 0.25075. So you can see the numbers are starting to get out of hand really quickly. Lastly, let's add x plus delta x and y plus delta x, y plus delta y. That's 1.9 and 1.44. Again, the numbers are getting out of hand here, so I'm not really going to be writing down all the calculations again, like we did for the previous line. I'm just going to start writing down the numbers. We'll bring down our last result to the next line. Here's our delta x. Our delta y is going to be x plus 1 multiplied by y. That's 4.20282. Next, we're going to multiply negative 0.5 multiplied by the 4.202. That gives me negative 0.210141. And lastly, we're going to do x plus delta x, which is 1.9 plus negative 0.05, that's 1.85. And y, which is 1.449, plus negative 0.210. 1.23910. We're not there yet, so we're going to go ahead and once again bring that last result to the beginning of the row. 1.85, comma 1.239. Delta x is still negative 0.05. M is going to be 1.85 plus 1 multiplied by 1.23910. That's 3.53145. Delta y is m times delta x, so negative 0.05 multiplied by 3.531. 1.7657. And lastly, x plus delta x, that's 1.85 plus negative 0.05, that's 1.8. And then 1.239 plus delta y, 0.176, 1.06253. So after all of that, we can say f of 1.8 is approximately equal to 1.06253. I think here the key step is to realize that to get across this table, we got to do delta x multiplied by m is equal to delta y. Multiply equals multiply, etc. down the line. So we'll see you for the next one.